TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Why should the content industry care about COP26? Is it taking climate change seriously enough? And what should it be doing to make a real difference? And is it all in vain anyway? And really just a massive greenwashing exercise? I'm trying to find out on this week's COP26 TellyCast. Now, we're right in the middle of COP26 right now, the climate change conference happening in Glasgow. World leaders have gathered this week to address the rapid climate change we've caused by using oil, gas, and coal for our homes, factories, and transport. The world's now about 1.2 Celsius warmer than it was in the 19th century, and the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has risen by 50%. In order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, scientists say global warming needs to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. And so here we are in the first few days of the event that many politicians are claiming as the last chance to make a difference and for countries to come together to address climate change. But how does the TV and content industry fit into this? Well, joining me is Carys Taylor, Director of Albert, the TV industry-funded authority on environmental sustainability for film and TV. Welcome to TellyCast, Carys.
Thank you, Justin. Really nice to be here, and especially at such a significant time.
Exactly. Well, this is why I really wanted to have a good old chat about this, because right at the moment, all we can see on the news, all we can see on brands advertising, all we can see on media is COP26 and pictures of Joe Biden falling asleep and Boris Johnson as well. Anyway, but let's not go into that. So you're talking to us direct from Glasgow, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm amongst the sort of Pacific Key buildings at the moment. We've had one event yesterday, and we've got a plethora of other events coming this week. It's really exciting, hustle and bustle.
Now, how did you get up, Carys? Did you fly?
Oh, I didn't. No, I was sort of in the eye of the storm that I think you and everyone else will have heard about in the press on the Sunday travelling up. What would have been a 5-hour journey was 13 door to door. It did mean that I missed a couple of things Sunday evening, but did eventually get here in one piece and welcomed by Glaswegians cladding, fake blood and devil. It's like surreal.
Yeah. After a nightmare journey, you arrive in a real life Halloween. But
that's right. It was a happy Halloween horror of a day. But yeah, all by train, no flights for me.
But I suppose that underlines it, doesn't it? Some of the issues that everybody's gathering to talk about is, the climate was actually almost making itself heard. Maybe you could say that. But so tell us, in terms of the TV industry and the content industry, other than obviously we're all concerned citizens in our own right, wanting to see governments pulling their fingers out and making some bold moves. But why should the TV and content industry care about what's happening in Glasgow right now?
There's a few reasons that they should care. I mean, the first being obviously that they sort of serve audiences, and audiences are going to be impacted by the worst effects of climate change if this goes unaddressed. But they're also going to be affected by all the decisions that are being made this and next week, very soon. In one way or another, the world leaders here are gathered to talk about saving the natural environment that we realise is existing in a very delicate balance that we are risking. But there's also, human stories alongside all of this that are happening right now. People are feeling the effects of climate change right now. And then there's also sort of, closer to home, I guess, the way that we all need to live is going to have to change at scale and very quickly. And so obviously broadcasters, content creators have a responsibility, but also a huge creative opportunity with that to make sure that audiences are sort of part of the transition and that the transition doesn't just happen to them, it happens with them.
To that point, I mean, we saw Sir David Attenborough opening the summit with a really impassioned speech the other day. And that just as a reminder, I think, of a broadcaster having spent his life dedicated to telling stories about the natural world, addressing world leaders and telling them now's the time, it's now or never almost. I mean, that was an impactful start, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously there's a lot of respect for Sir David Attenborough and his career. And I think he comes at it with a certain amount of humility, recognising that he's lived through a very privileged period, I guess, because he's been able to travel and see all these delicate ecosystems, but they are they have declined over his lifetime. And I think he positioned his message quite well in terms of hope for younger generations. We're seeing a lot of data come through about climate fatalism, which is massively concerning because we need people to feel empowered and able to adopt the solutions that are available to us all now and be part of the mass in delivering a mandate to the policymakers who are reliant on sort of pulling the levers that they have to make this all happen.
You use the term climate fatalism. What is that?
It's awareness of the risk of climate change, the fact that it is here and the effect it is having right now, and the fact that we're hurtling towards terrible outcomes for life on this planet, and feeling that we've gone past the point of return and that we aren't able to do anything about it. So feeling kind of resigned to it and fatalistic about the kind of journey we have ahead. I would like to think I'm an optimist. I think we do have time to act. We have solutions. I think actually Attenborough himself put it very well. I can't remember the exact quote, but that collectively, if we work together now, we can solve it.
We've seen the Russian and Chinese premiers haven't even turned up to Glasgow. And as they're the world's biggest polluters, if that's not a message coming from them, I don't know what it is. I mean, isn't it all in vain, really? I mean, isn't this just a very expensive greenwashing opportunity for brands and politicians? Or is it really the time now for us all to really make an effort in our own lives, but also for governments to be brave and bold and make that change?
I'd say there's a lot to be cautiously optimistic about. At the time of recording, we've had two significant announcements come out of COP26 already, and this is just from the first day. The first is India, which is I think it's the third largest carbon emitter, has announced net zero by 2070. That's really, really significant. I realise it's later than ours, it's 20 years after our own target, but given that they're still developing and they're very heavily dependent on coal, that is a hugely significant announcement. And I would hope we'll have a knock-on effect with other such countries.
It doesn't sound that impressive. 2070, I mean, I'll be dead by then. In the scale of things, why can't they commit to being 2050, for example, or, just really being a bit more aggressive?
Some of it comes down to the fact that they are still developing. There's sort of issues around finance. We have had our kind of industrial revolution been and gone in the West, and there are complications. This is not just about the science. This is also about political and economic levers. Of course, they could announce a target which they have no ability to achieve, but I think this is actually quite a sensible and positive outcome. And I think, for India to make that announcement, I think we should be pleased to hear it. As I say, they are the third largest carbon emitter, but they are actually, in terms of per capita emissions, relatively low. I think they're 1.9 tons of carbon emissions per capita compared to the global average of something like 4 or 5 per capita. So that's really significant. And then the other announcement that I think is really positive that we've had already is to end deforestation by 2030. I think there's been more than 100 world leaders sign up to that, and I think it includes Brazil, which is again very significant.
Obviously, they're all great and positive announcements. I would just really hope. I mean, I saw Greta Thunberg using the term blah, 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 I think, over the last few weeks. She's sort of camped out on the steps of COP26 and being a little bit cynical in terms of what we might expect, and saying that actually leadership is coming from the people that are protesting as opposed to the governments. But I suppose that's not really realistic, or is it? Well, what's your viewpoint on that?
I think that is to a degree. And I'd say that, there's a cycle here, sort of from our perspective in the world of film and TV. We've come some way in understanding our environmental impacts and avoiding them and reducing them as part of what Albert's been about for the past 10 years. We've been offering a carbon calculator. We've been offering free training. It's all about helping people understand what their environmental impacts are and avoiding them or reducing them. And I think we should be really quite proud of that. There's only so far we can go without the underlying infrastructure. And we've done some work on that as well to talk about shared infrastructure solutions. We need the government to be able to invest and develop policies that enable green energy and enable decarbonised transport for us to make use of. But there is definitely a cycle here. So we can help generate the demand by asking questions. Our industry is worth a huge amount to the economy, and we have collective economic might in generating those markets, including in the nations and regions where lots of broadcasters have bases. And then we obviously have a very large brain print speaking to our audiences, and we obviously, in speaking to them, we can enable them to be part of the conversation. We can inform them of the options available to them, and we can inspire them to act, to change their own individual behaviours, but also to arm them with the ability to hold the government to account and to provide the government with a mandate to do what is necessary. Before I was in this job, I came from the energy sector, and I was acting as a bit of a translator, I guess, between civil engineers with very clever ideas about how we decarbonise the energy sector. And I was talking to politicians about that who had voted for net zero, and they didn't understand the implications on public policy, public spending, and the need for government intervention with such new markets and innovation that we're going to need. And they can't do that without the public mandate. So it's a cycle. I do think that there is leadership from the public that can help enable world leaders to act in the right way, to enable us to have the resources we need to live greener lives.
Talking about the TV industry, I mean, we'll talk about the sort of the leadership role and essentially the influence that TV industry and the channels have. And we'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about the industry's contribution to climate change. How big a polluter is the TV industry and content industry? I mean, surely we don't compare to like manufacturing or heavy industry or anything like that. I mean, where are we in the league table in terms of how harmful our activities in terms of production and broadcasting? How harmful are we?
As you say, compared to heavy industry, cement and steel production, for example, a drop in the ocean. But people look to film and TV for innovation. We catalyse change. We're creative. If there's a production in someone's town, people take note. They want to know what they're doing, what they're using. We're trendsetters. So even off screen, we have a huge responsibility there. As I say, our contribution to the economy in shifting markets is really, really significant. I think getting that right, getting our production practices right, so walking the walk, gives us the right to then put it on screen and talk the talk. I think that's really important, that we have that authenticity when we're talking to audiences about those solutions in an optimistic way, that we can't appear to be hypocritical.
Let's just take a step back for a second then. So Albert is funded and supported by all of the major UK broadcasters. Is that correct? Who's behind Albert?
We're funded not only by the UK broadcasters, we've got an international membership. Netflix is on our directorate, as is Discovery. And BBC Studios is also, and ITV actually, they have international production bases. We have international specific members, including Fremantle, Sky and ITV. And we have a consortium, largely of producers. They all pay a kind of membership fee. The directorate members set the strategy, and the consortium members meet to discuss the implementation. And we have affiliate members. We also have university partnerships, and we have partnerships around the world where NGOs or broadcasters deliver our tools and resources on our behalf with a more local take on it.
If I'm a producer now and I get commissioned to make a show for, I don't know, Discovery maybe, in the UK, do I have to ensure that my production is net zero, if you like, doesn't have any harm on the environment? Because obviously we've seen a whole load of new agendas brought in over the last 2-3 years around diversity in nations and regions and various other standards, which quite rightly the industry has got to make. But I get the impression that climate change hasn't been at the top of those sort of priorities. If I get commissioned by Discovery, do I have to ensure that I meet a certain carbon emissions?
I'm not sure about Discovery's policy right now, but I know that a number of the broadcasters on our directorate have mandated Albert certification for all of their productions. And that certification means they've gone through the process, our process with the carbon calculator toolkit that we offer, in not just measuring their impacts, but also demonstrating active efforts to reduce their impact and offsetting any residual emissions that they were unable to avoid. We then provide them with a carbon neutral sort of end credit logo, which they can then proudly put on their end board. And I think, as well as mandating Albert certification to all of their productions and commissions, a large number of the broadcasters are also setting their own science-based net zero targets as a company. So it will be a kind of embedded across the whole of their operations and supply chains, which is really significant, really important.
So broadly, I could make my production and essentially, run across a checklist, and the production manager ensures that, as many of those issues are addressed, and then I get my certification. So it's essentially voluntary. There's nobody actually comes and checks that. There's no health and safety person that might come along and say, absolutely, here's your rubber stamp, you are Albert certified. It's actually down to the production manager to make those claims, send it to the broadcaster, and the broadcaster goes, okay, fine.
Well, not quite, no. The process is with us. We assess every carbon footprint that we get, and then we assess every carbon toolkit submission that we get. So we ask for evidence, and we have people in my team who will go through and do the assessment on every single production that we get through before we provide them with that end credit logo. It's up to the broadcasters to communicate to productions when they expect it is a mandated requirement. We aren't mandating. We're providing these tools and resources to everybody, but we're not mandating it ourselves. That's down to the broadcasters. We do the back end process with the calculator and with the evidence, and we sort of scrutinise it all.
Okay, so you provide the tools essentially, but it's really down to the broadcasters kind of police that in a way?
Well, we police the submissions, but they decide whether it's mandatory for their productions or not.
Essentially, it's really down to their policy at the end of the day. It really starts at where they want to be as a corporate business, and then that presumably feeds down to each individual production.
We offer the toolkit internationally as well. I do think our toolkit is best in class, but there are others available in other parts of the world. And my main message would just be make sure you're measuring so you understand where your impacts are, avoiding and reducing wherever you can. I think that should be the kind of consistent message from all broadcasters and purchasers of content everywhere, to sort of ask producers to understand their impacts and make reductions.
Do we have any idea of how many out of all of the productions that are made, how many are Albert certified at this point?
A couple of months ago, I think we were on 1,500 ever, but that is rapidly increasing now that we have various broadcasters having mandated it. So over the next year, we expect that to go up significantly. We've had many more do their carbon footprints. It's quite common for productions to do carbon footprints, but not quite go through the process to get certification, which requires you to demonstrate through your carbon action plan efforts that you're doing to make sure that you reduce your impact.
So actually, the TV industry and the content industry in its own right, the COP26 should really be a bit of a moment for the TV industry in terms of all the commissioning businesses. This is their opportunity to now say to producers, right, everything that comes through has to be certified, has to contribute to our own net zero calculations, if you like. And, this is the time for the Albert standard or similar standards to be adopted globally, and for businesses to really double down on their efforts in this area.
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity is actually what we're putting on screen. So we've been working to make reductions in production practices over the past 10 years. And we, some years ago, sort of embedded a second aim for Albert, which was about empowering the industry to put sustainability on screen. And I think by the time this goes out, you will have heard the announcement, which is extremely exciting, about the CEOs of the UK's largest media brands announcing at COP that they are committing to climate content. So we've got 12 UK broadcasters and streamers signing up to a climate content pledge that we've convened. They represent over 70% of time from UK audiences spending time watching TV and film. And the point of this pledge is to seize the opportunity to embed sustainability and the solutions around climate, enabling audiences to engage with it through all kinds of content, so that it's not natural history or news doing the heavy lifting. We are seeing there is not only an increase in kind of climate fatalism, but also a massive demand from audiences to say we're listening, we recognise this as an issue, and we want to know more about the solutions. And Sky earlier this week launched a report that was really significant about the number of people across Europe saying that they think that there is a role for broadcasters in helping audiences to understand what behaviours they can adopt if they wish to live more sustainably. The desire is there. We have to be careful not to be preachy. We have to be careful to do it in a hopeful, optimistic and solution-based way. And it's a really significant line in the sand from the leaders of the media sector in the UK to say, we recognise this as our biggest opportunity. And after 10 years of trying to understand, measure and reduce our own impacts, we're now going to help enable audiences to engage with this stuff too.
So essentially, this is a moment. And can you tell us who all those broadcasters are? I mean, I'm assuming it's BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky. Who else?
There's also STV, S4C, RTE, so the countries of the UK and beyond, UK TV, Viacom, Discovery, and as you say, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky, and BritBox.
And this brings us to the other point around, why this is important when it comes to the TV industry, is that it's not only about, the emissions that the actual production and the broadcast of programming generates. It's actually the real opportunity here, I guess, is the influence that the TV industry has and the content industry has in terms of digital and linear channels being able to communicate and generate action from individuals as well, isn't it? This is about communication to a mass audience, the changes that they can make in their daily lives.
That's right. I think there's individual behaviours which, if taken, en masse, have a collective outcome that's really, really positive. There are going to be huge infrastructure shifts and huge decisions made by governments, as we're hearing this week, and hopefully more coming, that are going to have a very direct impact on lifestyles for everyone alive today and unborn children in the future. I mean, without even talking about the effects of climate change itself, just thinking about the policy change and the infrastructure change that's going to happen, what that means for people in their lives, their jobs, the skills transition, everything. It kind of doesn't matter really if you feel that you're not interested in the environment and it's sort of all that COP stuff isn't really for you. I mean, fine, fair enough, but you probably have a job. You probably enjoy breathing air. You live in a country which is a democracy, so you have the opportunity to have a say in these things. And I think for broadcasters, like I say, it's not only a responsibility, but a huge creative opportunity to make sure that audiences are enabled to be part of this and they're not bystanders in something that, like I say, has to happen at massive scale and at massive pace. And we don't want to leave people behind.
So looking at the opportunities then and how the content industry can make this change when it comes to millions and millions of people around the world. We're talking about content. Obviously, we're very much aware of natural history content and that industry, and particularly Sir David Attenborough and the changes and effects that he's made through, Blue Planet and various other shows that have really opened people's eyes. And we've just almost had a touch of that. And we talk about natural history, and that's obvious. And news as well, you mentioned earlier on, news output and having regular climate news embedded into the editorial aspect of news shows. But what about other types of shows, and how can the climate change message be weaved into other types of content?
Do you remember Cheers, which is the US sitcom from the 80s?
I do. It's from the 80s. Yes, thank you. Yes, I do.
I'm not making any assumptions. I mean, these content has a long tail now. I'm told. So you can.
Very good, very good. You should work in PR, Carys. But anyway, yeah, go on. I do remember Cheers. Yeah.
Cheers sort of tackled drink driving issues in the US. There was an increase in fatalities related to drink driving, and they tackled this particular social issue of the time with the concept of a designated driver. And that's where I believe designated driver actually derived. That's sort of one example. There are tons of examples like this where we've, as an industry, hit a chewy issue head on and inspired change. But we have also done it where we've not hit it head on and it's been very subtle, but it has also affected change. Every year, Albert releases a report which we call Subtitles to Save the World. It's a little bit of a crude instrument for measuring how the industry is doing to put climate into content, but it basically is an analysis of subtitle data from the key broadcasters in the UK. And typically we've looked at how many times climate change is mentioned versus any other thing, including things like cat and dog and cake. But this year we looked more at the solutions and how they're being referred to and how often even. And we found that disposal, which included recycling, etc., had a huge number of references, but really has a very tiny contribution to UK greenhouse gas emissions, whereas energy, which has a much more significant contribution to UK greenhouse gas emissions, was mentioned much less. So disposal had more than 40,000 references and energy had less than 8,000. So as an industry, I think we can do more to draw attention to the high impact areas. And it doesn't have to be really overt. And it doesn't even have to be directly related to climate change. Like I say, there's skills transition. If you're a gas engineer right now, you might be concerned about what the future might look like for you. If you're working in haulage, again, what kind of technologies are going to be available for you to be transporting goods across the country? If you're talking about food, energy, transport, housing, purchasing goods, there's touch points all through all of that where climate and sustainability can be talked about without actually talking about climate change, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would imagine like soap operas, for example, this is all about, putting a little bit of a daily life under the microscope, that you would think that would obviously perfectly reasonably fit into their editorial approach. But what about, the areas that we have really mass audiences? So what about sport, for example? I mean, how can a broadcaster incorporate a climate change message into showing a Premier League game, for example?
They're doing it already. There's some really great work going on at the moment. Sky Sports has been doing a great job of embedding this content. And Hazel Irvine, who's the chair of our sports consortium, was involved in, of course, the Olympics earlier this year and found ways to reference sustainability and climate change throughout. Really, really impressive case studies. And we're always trying to elevate and celebrate these moments where we can with our sort of case study section on our website. But I'm not a sports broadcaster, have no experience of it. But of course, we're all aware from having watched it that there's a lot of time where, perhaps there's an incident on the pitch, for example, and the commentators can't have silent airtime. So they need to talk about, what's going on. And they find that quite a helpful filler at times, talking about the air quality on the pitch, how people travel to the stadium, what the stadium is being powered by at that time. There's a lot of ways to embed these things. And you touched on soaps a moment ago. And you might have seen there was an announcement a couple of weeks ago from the soaps saying that they're going to be, the first time ever, all working together to have a kind of shared climate storyline where they're also going to have sort of characters from each of the other soaps pop up and the kind of climate thread run through them, which is really exciting and sort of shows that the level of collaboration in this industry to making this shift happen.
Going back to the sport thing, we've obviously seen the development of Extreme E and various other electric motor racing, if that makes sense, electric car racing, electric vehicle racing around the world to raise awareness of this issue. And I know that Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button are involved with that. And then there's also the Formula One electric series as well. So perhaps we'll see those sort of sporting events start to get a bit more traction and be a bit more prioritized when it comes to broadcast partners, and those becoming further up the agenda. If all of these broadcasters are deciding that actually we're going to start prioritizing or raising the awareness of climate issue through our programming, then I suppose we're talking about an opportunity here, aren't we, for producers to start weaving in messaging, whether it's comedy, whether it's drama, knowing what you know. And in terms of what the major broadcasters are saying, do you think that climate-focused content or content with a climate message, whether it be explicit or implicit, is going to become in more demand and is a business opportunity now for producers?
100%, yeah. And that's part of the point of this pledge. So that because it's a pledge that's being signed by CEOs themselves of all of these media companies, and it's a signal to the industry that they hear that there is this demand from audiences, they recognise it, and they want to address it. So yes, please come forward with your ideas. And I should say as well, the next step, we're in early discussions with the global production community and broadcasters about a potential convening about this. All of the signatories are going to be setting their own internal targets around this and embedding this throughout, the commissioning process and what have you. But we've left it to them to make their decisions on how they're going to do that. So we're expecting we'll make some more announcements on that in due course. It's definitely, yes, to signal to content creators that there is a demand for this. If you've got an idea, now's the time to come forward with it, I think.
Well, it's an exciting time, and it's exciting time for you. I guess I realise we're running up against time, Carys, that you've got. What are you doing at COP then later today after our interview?
We've got an event this afternoon in the Green Zone, which is the kind of civic participation part of the formal COP venues. The reporting from the front line. So we'll be hearing from people who've been creating this content, seeing the impacts, on the front line of what climate change looks like, and talking about how, I guess, factual and news content, even if it's not just about a flood or a crop failure or something that's very clearly related to climate change, how it can be embedded in other stories as well, because it does often play a role. We have a number of other events, so we've got tomorrow our CEO event where we'll be making the announcement of this pledge that I've been talking to you about today.
We will include links in the episode description and also on the TellyCast Plus newsletter this week to all of those announcements. And I guess it's always going to prick producers' ears up when they see an opportunity. And I've done a few pitches, Carys, when I've spoken to commissioners on the show, but maybe my heat pump drama might have an opportunity now. Listen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's great that you're able to host and put the TV industry's focus around COP26 and really help coalesce all of these disparate businesses that are all competing with each other to try and come together to achieve a greater goals. Congratulations on all of that, and have a great time. We'll see you very soon, Carys, and I hope you have a good train journey back home.
Fingers crossed. Thanks very much. Great to speak to you.
Well, that's about it for this week's COP26 telecast. As always, thanks a lot for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to the show and share it with friends and colleagues. And why not follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter? Telecast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Until next Thursday, as always, stay safe